Welcome to one of our last Capitol Clubs, and I'm grateful that we have such a good turnout today. This is a little bit, perhaps, out of our norm, but Fritz Benson is here joining us as a result of one of our members, Rob Campow from the Realtors, reaching out and tipping me off to a website that Fritz and the late Mike Ranville have put together called mygoodgovernment.com. And perhaps a forthcoming book as well. So Fritz and I grabbed coffee, where we had the good fortune of running into a mutual friend who invited us to the four governors' recent talk on civility. So this is a theme that is very much in the air, and that's a good thing because it's responding to a different feeling that's in the air. And I'm just going to say a little bit about Fritz. Many of you know him, and that's a result of him reaching out. I was a young staffer, and Fritz used to meet me at what was the old Bill Knapp's. I don't think we met. I just happened to show up, and you and Andy Such would kind of maybe buy me a beer, which was music to a Dutchman's heart. And there is Andy. So Fritz had a 31-year career as a partner in MLC, Michigan Legislative Consultants, where he got to know a lot of people. And he didn't just jump into that. He spent quite a number of years in the legislature where he had the good fortune of only focusing on 2 bills in his entire time there. Senate Majority Leaders Bill Fitzgerald and Senate Majority Leader Bill Faust. So together, as I said, with Mike Ranville, they dove into this political project that's striving to cut through that divisiveness that many of us have encountered, either directly or indirectly. You don't have to look too hard, whether that's Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook. Through this developing book and website, a compilation of over 40 stories and commentaries are shared or ready to be shared from highly respected former legislative leaders from both sides of the political aisle. And those are focused really on 5 main areas: effective leadership, unusual alliances that came together to solve difficult problems, key legislative accomplishments, and the importance of networking, kind of what Capitol Club has been around about for all these years, and then memorable mentors and friends.
Well, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Executive Committee, and everyone here for inviting me to come and talk a little bit about the My Good Government Project. And you can always go on www.mygoodgovernment.com, and it's been a pretty neat journey. And you'll hear me talk about, as we go through this, a lot about we doing it. And we started this about 2.5 years ago with Mike Ranville. Mike passed away last year, and but I still, sometimes I wish I could call Ranville on this. Get him involved and so forth. So it's been a great journey. Our purpose is to bring civility, respect, open communication, bipartisanship back to the political and legislative process. And this just isn't about Michigan. As we all know, this is going on in every state. I get calls from the Council of State Governments called me and talking about, geez, what you're doing there. And nationally, everybody's trying to bring it back. The Pew study last year showed that 83% of all registered voters believe that both parties should work together to solve difficult issues. I mean, that's what it is, and both parties are to blame. You get the 20% on each end drawing their line in the sand and, throwing bricks, and we aren't going to change. And I'll go back to this a couple of different times. And all of you as association directors and opinion makers, and that's one of the things that I'm so glad I'm here, because you are opinion makers. And you are respected personally and professionally, and that's why you are where you are. And you know that very good is not the enemy of perfect. And sometimes, and I'll talk about this, that in the past, we've had to come together to solve very difficult issues. So, as Derek mentioned, over 40 really case studies of constructive change. And we'll get into a couple of those because some are very poignant and others are kind of fun too. I'm not taking any money, royalties, anything for this. And I'll talk a little bit about some people who have been very helpful besides, Dave and Gary, but like Richard McClellan, who probably all of you know who Richard McClellan is, one of the top, maybe the top Republican lawyer in the whole state. And Richard has his very highly regarded Oxford Foundation. And we've received a couple of contributions that have really helped us get started because, to set up all the technical work that needs to be done and everything, I'd like to thank Brian Peters and Michigan Health and Hospital Association for their very generous grant that they gave us to help getting going, and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan that were also very helpful in getting us going. Our contributors index, I talk about it's an all-star team, and you go through and you see who's on it. How did that knucklehead Fritz Benson ever get these people to, step up and bring all this together? So, Jeff Poland, we met, Dave and Richard McClellan and I met with the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Foundation recently. And they said we had a treasure trove of Michigan political history. And I said, thank you, and we appreciate that, but I think what we have, even more importantly, is a path forward. And I think if we can get back to doing many of these things that we talk about in these stories, that will put us on a much more efficient process, and with the civility and respect and open communication. So this is about the future. I see this as a compass or a blueprint for political, guidance for us. So here are a couple of the stories that you'll see on the website. The Prime Minister is waiting. That's kind of poignant, right now when the talk was, not open up, the bridge. But you can see the shared power and, something like the Michigan Education Trust. And something's going on here. When Mike and I started this, and I would talk to people and I'd say, we're putting this together to bring civility and respect back to the process. And people would roll their eyes, good luck with that. But I'm telling you, things are going on. And like a meeting with the Gerald R. Ford Library and Foundation, they've dedicated $12 million for civility, respect, and bipartisanship to bring it back to the process in Michigan. And they're serious about it, and they want to work with my good government on some joint projects. And that's kind of neat. And so, and I saw Jeff Poland at the 4 Governors Policy Forum in February 4th in downtown Lansing. And I had a chance to talk to him, and he said, no, we got to get together. I got to do more stuff around Lansing, and if you can help out and do some of these things. And I said, I'd love to be helping you. We were on Off the Record last year, and Tim took the whole 30 minutes just to do our project. And a lot of it, any groups we appeared before, so it's been very positive because people want to see something happen in this area. So, in the Governor's Policy Forum, I think what's interesting there is you look at the sponsors of it, and all of you who have been working for a few years to a few decades in this, and I think, you see, here are the sponsors. The Mackinac Center, Civility and Respect. Mackinac Center, the Gerald R. Ford Library and Foundation, and who's on the board of Gerald R. Ford? It's the DeVosses, Van Andels, Padnoses, Huizingas, and Governor Engler. And they're one of the sponsors. The Governors Blanchard and Engler's protect democracy, which is mostly on elections, but it's also pushing that whole thing on civility and respect. And I've talked to both of them about it. We'll just say, and then the Governor's Policy Forum, they are very much moving forward. And the Oakland University was a sponsor, and this Michiganders for Civil Resilience, which is former Senators Tanya Shootmaker and Rebecca Warren, so Repub Dem. So how did we get started? And, you know, Mike and I had gone to one of these lobbyist staffers meetings, you know, at a bar in, you know, Lansing, and there's probably 20 of us there, you know, telling old stories, laughing, having a beer. And so Mike and I walked out, and, you know, I said, you know, somebody ought to write this down. And I said, well, a lot of these stories can't be published, Mike, you know. But we said, let's talk about it a little bit. So about a day or two later, I'm at the Michigan Athletic Club, where I go on a regular basis, and there's Bobby Krim. And Bobby, 90 years old, and he's still jogging, working out. You know, he's very flexible and everything. And so I say to Krim, how did you get along with Milliken and the Republicans? And he said, you know what? Every year until Bill Milliken passed, I drove up and spent a day with him. And we'd go to lunch or dinner and just talk about life in general and how we solve the world's problems. And he said, I had so much respect for him and what a fine person he was. And, you know, and I did it until he passed away. Now, I said, but how did you get along with him politically and everything? And he said, well, when we would get to a really tough issue in the legislature, and maybe a couple of years in a row, sessions in a row, nothing could happen, it would get bogged down, we would have a quadrant meeting. And all of you, many of you know the quadrant. That was the governor, the Senate Majority Leader, Senate Minority Leader, House Speaker, and the House Minority Leader. And in this case, with Milliken was governor, and the issue was work comp, workers' comp, unemployment comp. A recession in 1979, businesses were leaving the state. It was a horrible system, totally unworkable system. All these small work comp cases were ending up in court, you know, and it was totally unworkable. And so they got together. Milliken started pushing, we got to do something. So you have the House and Senate controlled by Democrats, and you had two Republican leaders, Bob Vander Laan in the Senate and Bill Bryant over in the House, smart guys, and said, all right, let's get something going. And I said, well, did you guys just sit down and got it worked out? And he said, hell no. He said, you know, everybody is crump paper, throwing it down and stomping out of the room. And, you know, he said that we met many times. And he said, but the whole thing was we all wanted to get something done. We all wanted to do it. And yeah, we're going back and forth. And two of the stories are about that. And one by Rich Studley, who was the staff person to Vander Laan during that time period. And it's the speech he gave to the University of Michigan Law Reform Committee. And it lays it all out. I mean, how it had to come together with both sides. And I go back to this, you know, very good is not the enemy of perfect. And they all said, all right, everybody's got to give a little bit, and they got to get a little bit. And so let's see what we can work out. So I went back to Mike and said, all right, let's figure this out. And we said, all right, here are the categories. Leadership, the importance of networking, unusual alliances that came together to pass difficult legislation, key accomplishments, memorable mentors and friends. Then after a while, we started, well, the media was getting to be very involved in this, and so we said, all right, let's get some media stories too, and we have some great ones. And then the importance of photography. And Gary contributed a great story on that, and it's important. And you'll see, I'm going to show you an example in a few minutes of the importance of photography on that work comp issue. And it's, you can go, and Gary has a number of examples in his story about that importance, but shoot, every legislator is looking for that spark, that one thing that kind of can put them in front or their issue in front. So the last one was photography. So let's talk about a couple of the stories here. And this is the picture. I just love that shot. And there is, from the left, there's Bill Faust, the Senate Majority Leader, Bill Bryant, Bobby Krim is Speaker, Milliken, and Vanderlaan. And this is when the quadrant finally came together and they said, we have it. And Bob Morris also, who was the Democrat staff person during that work comp period, where finally Krim just told the unions, this is it. This is it. We aren't changing one more word. And so at the picture where they came together, this was, all the press was there and the TV cameras, everything else. And the staff photographer from the House has the camera lined up and she's going to take a picture, and just as she's going to snap it, and she told me this, and just as she was going to snap it, a reporter cracked a joke in back, and bam, they all laughed and smiled at the same time. Are they laughing and smiling about everything they got in the bill? Well, they were happy about it, but to get them real laugh, real smile at it, that split second, she hit it, and she had the picture of the year. So, Rich and them laid out that whole thing about the importance of, it was an importance of networking, it's unusual alliances, that leadership, the total leadership to sell it to their particular caucuses to make this work. And I'm telling you, this was 10 years in the making until it was actually 1 year, but all the issues had been laid out in so much detail for the previous several sessions that they finally passed it. Then people tell me, well, Fritz, the issues today are just too strident and they can't be settled. They're too locked in stone. This issue on death and dying, this is when Jack Kevorkian assisted suicide, was in the national paper. Dr. Kevorkian practiced in Oakland County, and national news all the time. And Dave Hollister's grandfather wanted, had several strokes and just wanted, he said, don't keep me alive. If I have another stroke, I just don't want it. I can't function now. And he had said this earlier on, and then he kept having a stroke. And so I was, okay, I understand that. And he had a task force, a commission, and everything else. And Planned Parenthood and his staff were in the room. On the other side of the table was Fred Dillingham, conservative Republican from Fowlerville, and here were his two advisory groups, Michigan Catholic Conference and Right to Life. And they are going to, and Hollister said, I had not said they'd both been in the legislature about 3 sessions, I hadn't said 10 words to the guy. And he said, we just kept hammering it out and hammering it out. And what could work, but this thing on the top, assisted suicide, kept messing everything up because, that was so divisive. But they finally passed legislation on durable power of attorney, hospice, and right to die when you had set something in place beforehand. And it's, Michigan's hospice legislation is some of the best around. It's in the country. And so that's one. Unusual alliances couldn't possibly work together. And Hollister and Dillingham are still friends today. They talk all the time. Well, this is the story, obviously, of how people can, should, and did work together, and it can happen again. In the 1992 election, the Republicans won 56-54. But we won't have a test here, but there was a recount on a district in Macomb County where, and it ended up the Democrat under the recount won by 7 votes. Dennis Olshovy, Macomb County. So they had to come together and figure something out. I mean, were you just going to go home 55-55? How were you going to run committees? And that was when they did every month it switched, and Hilligans would be speaker for, that's Paul Hilligans and Curtis Sertel, and would be speaker, but the committee chairs would be of the other party. And how could this possibly work? They passed all kinds of legislation. And they said, we aren't going to vote until everybody says, all right, we have an agreement. And it wouldn't have to be everybody, but it would have to be enough. So, the magic numbers in politics, 56, 20, and 1. 56 votes in the House, 20 votes in the Senate, and 1 governor to sign, whatever you have. So that's how it kind of came together, and they worked it out, and we can do that again. But it was 2 people that they didn't know each other really well, and read the story, it's great. And Dan Lepp was right in the middle of it, and of course you know Dan. And so, I use this example quite a bit, and also Hilligans wrote a great story on leadership too, and on also tribute to 2 of his very close friends in the legislature, Jim Dressel and Don Gilmer. Well, the Duffers Invitational. And, you talk about the importance of networking. And I started out this thing. I said, I don't golf. I play other sports, but I can hit a baseball farther than I can a golf ball. And so I said, all right, for guys and women who don't play golf, I'm going to have a little, golf outing. And so this was with mostly staffers, but in this case, a Cub reporter, Dave Wayfire. And so, but we would go out and we did it for 15, 20 years. But as it got farther and farther along, the staffers that originally picked that weren't golfers, I didn't want that. We'd go out when the legislature wasn't in session, once a year. And we would go out, and so over the years, all of a sudden they're running associations. There's Rob Campo, he's a staffer with Mick Meadow at the time, Eric Henning, and, I didn't care. Nobody cared if it was Repubs or Dems. Who cared? Now they aren't supposed to talk to one another, And so we would go, and after the first year, a couple said, oh, this is great. I'm going to take golf lessons. I said, you don't want that. We don't want that. And so after the second year, who remembers John Koss? Remember John? Somewhat of an opinionated staffer and everything, worked for John Engler. And Koss shoots like a 40. And we'd go to Red Cedar Golf Course, that little seedy golf course. And then we would retire for the awards presentation to Dagwoods. That's where we are in that picture. And so, but nobody cared who was Repubs and Dems. But and there's, the trophies down there in the corner. You can see I spent a lot of time and money on those trophies. A beer can with it wrapped around in 1995, Duffers Invitational Best Putter. And the grand prize would go to the person with the highest score. And the low score was suspended for a year. And John Koss says, you can't suspend me, I'm a charter member. And I said, well, the rules committee voted. And he said, it's the Duffers, there's no rules committee. But we had a lot of fun. And I'll just real quickly, one year, and by this time, guys would start out doing. Mark Murray was getting ready to take the job as president of Grand Valley, and, others who were running associations and everything else. And so some of our rules at, the Duffers, proper golf attire is not encouraged, some of those things. And so everybody trash talked each other, And so this young Senate staffer, and I said, why don't you come on out, Mike, and, you can play with our group and everything. So we go out, and, all right, Fritz, there's 3 or 4 foursomes, and you tee off first. And so I get up there, wham, slice it right into the woods. Hey, great shot, man, great Duffer shot. Then next guy up, hooks one across Michigan Avenue, where you tee off there. It ends up in Wild Bill's bedding warehouse, in the parking lot over there. Hey, great shot, tough lie though. And then this young staffer steps up. Remember, no good golfers in this. We don't want this. He told, I don't really golf a lot or anything. And I said, right up that left side. And the first hole is 280-yard par 4. And so he hits it, comes up, then just drifts back in a little bit, rolls up on the green pin high, about 12 feet away. And everybody just gets on. Who the hell is that? Who did that? This is the Duffers, not the Masters. And he felt terrible, here are all these hot shots, that are playing. And so we start walking up towards the pin, and I said, now, Mike, I have a suggestion that you'll probably want to follow is don't make this putt. That's what I suggest. So anyway, but what a great thing for networking. And so we have a few ideas. And I put these on here, and Dave, there's a lot of things we can do, but, let's monitor the new term limit system carefully. See how we changed it one time, it's probably for the better, Help all members understand the state better, Michigan State's leadership program, political leadership program, they now have started a program, legislative exchange, similar to the Congressional Legislative Exchange program. And they have 8-person advisory committee, 3 of whom have contributed stories to My Good Government. So, that's getting around there. Restructuring leadership packs. Out of office shared experiences, the softball games, the Duffers tournament, I don't care. But, it's that getting people together, talking about things, socializing together, that all helps. It's the old, what was it, Gerald Ford and Tip O'Neill. They would be arguing back and forth on legislation and everything else, and then there's that great picture of them the next day out in the golf cart on the golf course, having fun. Encourage more academic presentations around the Capitol, and I think this is one of the things that the Gerald R. Ford would like to do. Some of that stuff, the more of the academic side. And then the legislative committees and chairs need to be more involved in decision making. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not involved in it anymore, but people tell me that, right now it's a bill comes out of leadership, give us to a committee chair, here, report this out next Tuesday, no amendments. What is this for a committee chair? You're supposed to be having open discussions on this and talk about possible solutions. So these are something, and also, and I look to the Capitol Club in a way that, at your various meetings and with summer sessions, and I'll talk about this in just a second, having legislators see and hear that, open communication is a good idea. Networking is a good idea, and I think helping educate them, some of these term-limited members who haven't been around the legislature very much, showing, hey, this is how you can get things done in a better way. Some takeaways. Now, as a longtime lobbyist, when I'd have a big meeting, I always like to have a couple of things to take away from that, And one of them is, we're ready to speak to your group we would like to come to one of your meetings, whoever it is, and talk about my good government. And, you know, how about it, if one of your major groups, that we could get a panel discussion, get former Lieutenant Governor Cherry, maybe former Speaker Hilligans, or a Bob Emerson, and Dan DeGros, to come and talk about working together, the importance of it, effective leadership. I think that'd be a great session to have. I would be more than willing to talk to any of you to talk what might work best for your group. We have, in effect, a tremendous speakers bureau. You saw the names on there of some of our contributors, and we'd love to work with you on that. Second thing is, we need your financial support. I'm not taking a nickel for this. I've spent more than a nickel. But I think that as we get bigger and we get more and more support, and, you know, I told the executive committee at the table here, you know, last week I had Jim Blanchard call me. And the main reason he called is to my former partner, Tom Cleary, passed away, 93 years old, fantastic guy. And Governor Blanchard called and said, you know, how much he liked and respected Tom Cleary, really enjoyed working with him and everything else. We talked for a while, and then he said, tell me about this project you're doing. You know, how did you know that? Well, here's what we're doing. He said, give me some information on that. So when we got back, I was out in California with grandkids at the time. And so when I got back, I sent him all this stuff. And it's getting around, you know, but if to drive more people to websites, all of you understand this, to drive more people to the website, to upgrade it with, you know, not me fussing around with it, you know, but you need professional assistance, technology help, and everything else. And again, thank Brian and the Health and Hospital Association, I thank Blue Cross, but it doesn't have to be huge, but we think this is very worthwhile. It could be very worthwhile for your associations, but we need help. And Richard McClellan, his Oxford Foundation, so highly regarded. I mean, Richard's so highly regarded. A check to him, the Oxford Foundation, Richard McClellan, president. And we'll make sure to get back timely reports. And then we are going to publish a book on the process, and we've already sent it out to various publishing houses. Publishing a book in this day and age is really difficult because not as many people are buying books anymore. And so it's tough, but we'll get through it. And if we don't have it by this summer, I'm just going to self-publish. We have fabulous pictures, and you know, some of our contributors say, Fritz, we'll get the money to publish it. That's no big deal. I mean, they all sit on all these boards. And so that is what we've done. And I would be willing to, if anybody has a question or anything else, I'd be willing to answer it. And thank you very much for inviting me to be here.